Cool. Alrighty. Well, hey team. My name is Alex Dombrowski, and I'm a member of the AI ML specialist team. If you guys happen to join the community call a couple weeks back, we presented. You may recognize me. We presented on IXP and some agentic capabilities. And so I'm back with some additional content in a similar vein, a little bit different, but some similar topics. So if you missed that other session, then this will be a good replacement. If you caught it, then this will be a good way to refresh on some of the things that we talked about. But my goal here today is just to sort of give you guys some lens into sort of the trajectory that UiPath is on. We've released a lot of new capabilities within the last few months that center on generative AI and agentic capabilities. And so like we tend to focus heavily on sort of what are the big capabilities, what are the new products, but some of the features that we bring to life within that domain are equally as important. And if you don't know about them, then you can be missing out on some of the things that will make your lives easier and ultimately help you accelerate time to value within some of the areas of our platform that are typically more complex for most users. And so I wanted to spend some time with you talking about some of those features today, highlighting how to use them within the platform, what to how to access them, what value they provide, and ultimately just make sure that everybody has sort of the best and most bleeding edge technology at their fingertips to help them achieve their business goals. So we're going to talk about four different things today. Everything that we discuss will be will sort of fall under an inference heading, and we'll talk in a minute about what inference means or what that term means if you're not familiar with it. But from there, we're going to step into some different parts of the platform and largely just spend some time demonstrating some different capabilities within the IDP realm. So we'll start by looking at some of the ways that inference capabilities come to life within communications mining. We'll look at some of the ways that those capabilities come to life in document understanding, and then we'll end looking at some of the ways that they come to life within the unstructured and complex documents arena. My goal is to spend most of the time in number four because that's probably the newest and the area that is most interesting or unfamiliar for most of the people on this call. But I think just in the interest of doing justice to the topic of inference, it's probably worth revisiting some of these other technologies that have been here a while, but may require a reminder or a refresh just to make sure that we're all speaking from the same songbook. One quick thing. So I am essentially flying solo today, and so I encourage you to put questions in the chat. I have one of my peers behind the scenes is sort of helping chat or helping manage some of the Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat window. If for whatever reason there are things that go unanswered, I will try to take some purposeful pauses along the way to cover to catch up on some of the questions. And I'll also try to live about 10 minutes towards the end to tie up on any of the main themes. So be patient with me. I'm kind of like one and a half people doing Q&A today, so we'll try to hit the questions when there's an opportunity to do so at some relevant times. So the first thing that I wanted to sort of ask you guys, and please, like, if you'll answer in chat, I would appreciate it. I wanted to spend some time talking about the concept of inference. And so I thought I'd ask, if you think about just the term inference, what does it mean to you today? And just take AI out of the equation entirely. If you have any suggestions or thoughts, feel free to drop those in chat. I'll wait just a second for a few answers to roll in to the extent that we have some brave souls who wanted to drop their thoughts in. But like ultimately inference is really just a conclusion or opinion that's formed because of known facts or evidence. It's a hypothesis, right? It's something that you can guess at because you've probably been in that situation before. So the reason that I wanted to start with this concept is because everything that we're going to talk about today builds on that idea. And instead of just inference by itself, I want to talk about this notion of inference first. Inference first refers to our strategy within the UiPath platform as it pertains to not only intelligent extraction and processing, but a number of the other areas of our platform as well. And while it leverages that term inference, it strictly applies within an AI context in the sense that rather than merely making educated guesses, we're allowing the AI to do that with the intent of improving ease of use, creating efficiency, and ultimately reducing effort. And so generative AI obviously plays a big role in this. I think we can all see how there is opportunity to leverage generative AI to do these kinds of things. And so the conversation today will in large part center on what are some of the ways that these features come to life within the platform, and really sort of connecting the dots on how Inference First is productized within those disparate parts of the platform that I talked about earlier. Fundamentally, though, this is a conversation about intelligent extraction and processing. And I want to touch on this for just a moment because I think there's at least some confusion about what IXP is and what it is not. The term IXP does not refer to a particular product or service or enhancement that was recently released. Rather, it refers to, it's more of an umbrella term that refers to a number of different products that fall into the intelligent document and processing domain and how we're starting to bucket those products together. And this is in large part just a change in the way that we are defining our user experience and pulling together a set of tools that are meant to allow organizations to extract data from different types of unstructured documents, whether it's emails or help desk tickets, uh, documents, both structured and semi-structured. And now we have some really exciting enhancements to share around how we're enabling the extraction from unstructured and complex documents. This is just the beginning for us as we move more and more towards multimodal classification and extraction end to end. So right now we have a few different types of data within the system that can be processed via AI. We, to a certain extent, can handle images as well. Where we see ourselves going in the future, so more of a sort of an area to watch, is around things like audio or video or more high fidelity graphics and images, and being able to extract information from those kinds of data sources in the same way that we do from documents and emails and things like that today. But more to come. For today, we're really just going to focus on those areas that we have highlighted thus far. And so, if you think about broadly, the last sort of thing that I'll say from a setup standpoint before I pivot into demos, if you think broadly about how AI has been implemented in our platform, what we are really doing today is sort of distilling it down to, how are we bringing it to life in the interface? How is generative AI being used in a few of these different areas to help drive efficiency, to drive ease of use, and ultimately make your lives easier? So with that in mind, I'm going to pivot into some demonstrations. The first thing that I want to do, though, is just sort of orient to where we are within the continuum. And so we're going to start with communications mining. IXP, just brief overview for anyone for whom this is a new concept. Follows the path of receiving, understanding, and extracting, and then acting on data. Over on the left-hand side, you have a number of different data types that can be fed into the UiPath system. In the middle, you have different unstructured data types that from which we can extract key data and then feed them downstream for the UiPath platform to take action on. You can weave human in the loop into that experience. So to the extent that there are checks and balances that need to be in place in order for humans and robots and agents to work together in concert, you have the flexibility to define that as you see fit. Communications mining specifically works in this way. This is our natural language processing capabilities. And if you think about emails, they're one of the most prevalent forms of communication in the average enterprise today. And what has been challenging with interpreting emails is the fact that they have a lot of disparate data that needs to be collected. You need to interpret the information that's in them. And then collecting and assimilating that data in such a way that it can be sent downstream can be very difficult. But the UiPath platform has made that very easy by leveraging natural language processing to allow you to automate the steps that are required in order to capture all of those disparate data points and then serve them in a way that can be used. So we can collect three different key pieces of information. Entities are all of the disparate data points. In this case, if you were going to take an action on something because you understood what it was, what are the pieces of information that would be necessary to take that action? And if you look at this example on the screen, we have some different things that are happening, but we're collecting the order number, we're collecting the SKU, we're collecting the update in quantities, we're collecting the new address because if you look at the intents, which are the things that we have detected within the message that are the actions that the author wants to take, if you if you wanted to achieve those things, you would need all of the entities in order to do that. And then the last down at the bottom, sentiment is frustrated. You see I feel like this is a necessarily hard statement there at the end. The reason that that might be important is, perhaps, in cases where, there's negative sentiment, you want to escalate something for action more quickly than it would if it was going through the typical processing channels. So the point here is that you have a lot of flexibility to identify the data that is most important, to identify what the author is trying to get done, and then to use that to achieve a number of different goals downstream. You can automate the lookups within an ERP system to make the changes that are necessary. You might trigger an email that responds to the author to let them know that you're taking action. The beauty of generative AI is you do have the ability to sort of let an agent do that, and so there are options to introduce some variance into the language by using an agent as the mechanism to trigger that email. And then last is, analyzing some of the data that exists within the data set to understand broad trends, themes, and positions. And so what I'm going to do now is actually pivot over to the platform and bear with me for 1 second while I swap screens. Okay. Um, so I've opened up our platform and I have navigated to one of our projects within the communications mining segment. And so to sort of orient to what we want to do in this section, I'll give a brief overview of what's on the screen, but then we'll pivot into talking about how generative AI is actually playing a role within the experience. And so the way to think about what you're seeing on the screen is we've ingested a number of messages over about a year's period of time. And if I scroll down to this label tree map, I can start to see a hierarchy of the different themes that are beginning to emerge from those conversations. I can drill into these and I can see all of the different things that are happening. So these are all of the different intents that have been identified as part of this project. So these are all the things that the customer or the author of that message is trying to accomplish. And then I have some very clear data that suggests, based on the quality of service, based on the tone, based on the volume that is associated with certain labels, where is there some opportunity to apply automations to create some efficiency? But here's the rub. When you think about getting to this point, there's some work that needs to be done, and sometimes it is not insignificant. And as an example, one of the things that you have to do as a first start is to define all of those different labels that you need within the platform. And this is good if you know exactly what you're looking for, but sometimes you don't. I think that the challenge with any type of NLP analysis is that you don't know what you don't know. And there aren't always opportunities to identify things that you don't know explicitly to ask for. And so it can take time to identify this hierarchy, but then even then, if you don't know to put something in it, then you may miss the analysis that's associated with it because you lack that insight. And so we have some different mechanisms that we could look at to achieve that goal. The second thing that I want to point out is, in typical circumstances, you have to label some messages, right? We've brought in, around 53,000 messages. We've created 62 labels, and we've annotated around 3% of those to get to a fairly decent model score, which tells us that it would perform pretty well in a production scenario. There's certainly some opportunities to improve, but just for the purpose of demonstration, this is a pretty good state for the typical AI model. But what if we could use generative AI to achieve some of those goals for us? Well, let's look at a similar project, but one that is slightly different. So this is built on a similar data set. So you can see some very sort of similar themes around orders and delivery and returns and inquiries and so on and so forth. And if I drill in a little bit more, I can see some of the second level detail on what some of those labels are. But what I'll point out is that, I have this list of labels here, and I have the AI generated label tag next to it. So what I've done for this project is, rather than actually creating my taxonomy, I haven't uploaded any taxonomy at all. This was all AI generated. I just let the system define those labels based on its analysis. And so what this allows me to do is, number one, get to a point where I have a really clear hierarchy of data very quickly. But it also allows me to pick up on some of the things that I may not have known to ask. So all of those sort of unknowns that I talked about falling through the cracks, when you start to use generative AI, you get much higher fidelity on the reports, and it may surface some things that you may not have known existed. And the second thing that I'll point out is that this has been done with, zero messages annotated. And so the reason that I'm highlighting this is because when you start communications mining projects in particular, there is often a perception, either from the business or from the COE, that there's some heavy lifting that is associated with getting that project off the ground. But what I want to sort of leave you with is the idea that there are some ways that are built into the platform that allow you to drive some significant efficiency within that early stage. And so, with very little work, you can get to a point where you have a very robust taxonomy that's been developed, and put yourself in a very good position with a little bit of training to get to a very high performing model. So I'm going to pivot back to our deck, and that does it for our segment on communications mining. What I'd like to do now is take one step forward, and we're going to move from talking about communications mining into talking about some of these capabilities in the context of structured and semi-structured documents. So very similar viewpoint. We're going to jump down to the bottom, but all of the steps in the process are still the same. But what is different is the way that we've sort of engineered the experience within the platform to make it much, much easier to load samples, to annotate, and ultimately to train your model through a completely guided experience. And we refer to this as the modern experience. If you're still labeling documents or using what we refer to as classic, as the mechanism to build models and deploy them. Where we are putting more and more emphasis and investment is in the modern experience. And what it does is it gives you a bit easier to use UI, but it also offers some enhancements in terms of the models that are available. The modern experience it contains access to our most current and most up-to-date models. And so some of the common problems that we saw within the classic experience have been mitigated through the what we now offer within modern. So what I'm going to do is pivot back to the platform now. So we're just going to continue to sort of toggle between these two parts of the platform. And oops. I'm going to open up this second project. So as I said, we've pivoted off of communications mining and we're now in document understanding. And just to orient to this interface for anyone who hasn't seen it before, this is our new modern interface for building and deploying high-performing models within the document understanding platform. You have a few navigation tabs over on the left. You have some tips and tricks over on the right that will continue to update in real time to tell you what steps should be taken to improve the performance of the model. Those, as you start to take more and more steps that are part of this recommended experience, you'll see the project scores start to increase from 0 all the way up to 100, and that's a good estimate of readiness to deploy that model into production. And so I've actually started two different document types here. I've started a 4506T, which is sort of a tax document, or we'll take a look at it for those of you that aren't familiar with it. Invoices, though, are something that are probably more familiar, more common. And there are some nuances to each one of these projects. So I'm going to jump into the annotation experience to talk through how inference-led capabilities are coming to life here. So the first thing that you're going to see when I open up this view is you have something that you should at least be familiar with if you've built models in Classic previously, which is this notion of extraction fields and table fields and the way that we're sort of color coding some of the different values that are being called out in the document. And so I'm using just the out of the box taxonomy here. So you can customize the taxonomy as much as you like, but for the purpose of this conversation, I just kept it as the standard. And what you'll see here in the middle are that you have a number of values that have been underlined. And we refer to these as pre-annotations. And so if you used the predict capabilities in Classic, that leverage generative AI and some of our models to make predictions without having to manually label. This capability is very similar. It is a mirror image of that feature. The difference in modern is that, as I said before, we're using some of our updated models. And so I would expect the pre-annotation or that predict capability to outperform what would be available in the classic experience, and therefore make the process of labeling that much easier. When we talk to our customers about how this has impacted their approach to labeling documents, and we've heard as much as 80% reduction in the time that it takes to get a model ready for fully trained and ready for production. And as you know, if we're ultimately talking about things like time to value and reducing manual effort as the mechanism to sort of measure the success and value of this project, then that ability to reduce the effort associated with getting this capability in market is a really important factor in delivering that kind of value to the business. But what I also want to do is I'll focus on this 46T. And the first thing I'll do is I'll pull up just an example document so that you guys can see what it is. It's a very simple sort of tax form. And Just like the invoice, I have a number of fields that have been that I've used from the predefined model, but I've also added some custom fields. So everything from 1A name down are part of the out of the box model, but I have, representative name and OMB number as two fields that I added to the taxonomy because I wanted to highlight a particular capability. And so what I did was I went into the project and created my customizations, and I added a single document and went in and confirmed all of the values that are associated with that document, including the representative name and the OMB number that I wanted. And so once I did that, I added the rest of the documents in. And what you'll see is that even though, it's not part of the out of the box taxonomy, the model is picking up on certain values right out of the gate. And right, I've only labeled a single document, and so I wouldn't expect it to be perfect. But this is a really easy way. Like if you are creating custom documents, if you are starting with out of the box models and then making customizations to them to fit the needs of your business, this inference-led ability to predict the values that should be extracted is something that you can leverage. And not a lot of people know that there's a little hack that, if you upload a single document and then you label it and you upload the rest, that training will take effect and start to propagate through the other documents that you have embedded within the project. I'm going to pause for just one moment and see if there are questions or comments in the chat that we should be addressing.
So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat,
Okay.
Alex.
Okay. Cool. Well, guys, if you do have further questions, please feel free to bubble them up. What I'm going to do now, though, is, I've touched on some of the key features within both communications binding and document understanding that are part of that inference first umbrella. And now what I'm going to do is pivot into intelligent extraction and processing.
Hey, Alex, before you get going, we just
Sure.
got one question. How
Okay.
can we migrate from classic to modern?
Yeah, so the simple answer is you can download your training data from AI Center and re-upload it into the modern experience. There are some tips and tricks, some nuances to the settings within modern that you will need to apply. But it's pretty well documented in our documentation. We've made some pretty significant strides in improving the level and quality of how some of these more nebulous steps are documented in our online docs. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that. If there's time at the end, I'll grab a link and I'll drop it in to make it a little bit easier to find. But in short, you can migrate your training data over. That gives you a good baseline of performance. You'll still want to do some additional training on the newer models, but it shouldn't be anything in the order of completely starting over, building your project from scratch, if that makes sense.
And then a follow-up question is, do we need new license or existing license will be sufficient?
Yeah, so existing license is sufficient as long as you license document understanding as part of the services that you use with UiPath. You can leverage either modern or classic.
Great, thanks.
Oh, of course. Um, so for the balance of the time, we're going to talk a bit about unstructured and complex documents and and the distinction I'm making here between IXP and unstructured complex documents is really that UCG, unstructured complex documents, I'll use that acronym UCG. It refers to one of the features within the IXP umbrella. But in particular, the biggest difference here is that rather than uploading documents, labeling them to train the model, and then deploying that model into production, everything that's done to guide the model is based on prompts. And so all of the instructions that you give are provided in natural language. There's no training per se. We'll talk about what we call validation and the need to sort of evaluate the performance of the LLM and the predictions that are being made. But for all intents and purposes, for the certain document types that are more complex, that are unstructured, this can offer a very fast time to value because there is no need to go through and manually label documents. As soon as you have a baseline set of docs that are performing well against the prompts that you create, you will start to see very good results. So I'm rather than sort of just talk philosophically about it, what I want to do is sort of expose you to some of the steps. And so we're going to toggle between a couple of different projects. I have this complex tables start project that's basically just a blank slate. We haven't done anything to it yet. But I also have one that's been fully built out and fully labeled so that we can, or sorry, the prompts have been completed. So we can sort of look at like how do you get started, and then we can fast forward to the end, and we'll treat this kind of like a baking show where you show the baked cake and you understand sort of what the end result is look like, and we assume that you're going to understand sort of how to get from here to there. So the first thing that I want to do is I'll open up this document so that we can take a quick look at it. There are some things that are probably important to call out as part of sort of orienting to this project. So this is just a generic sort of meter reading document that a number of different types of companies might leverage. What makes this document interesting is that there are values in table format that need to be extracted. And more importantly, there are one, two, three, four, five, six, seven-ish different tables in this document that need to be extracted. And using document understanding, the structured and semi-structured, this isn't the kind of project that we would have been able to approach, or if we could, it would have taken a lot of gymnastics to get that project working because document understanding doesn't allow you to manage multiple tables. At least it doesn't allow you to do it very easily. It's not something that most of our customers have done. And so what we want to do is create a taxonomy within the IXP or the UCG framework that will allow us to extract all of those different values. And so what I'm going to do is I'll go back over to our main page, and I'll dig into, or I'll drill into this manage taxonomy section. So there are two key terms that are important to understand with respect to creating your taxonomy. There are field groups and there are fields. So the way to think about this process is what you are essentially doing is creating a number of tables for the LLM to extract. And whether that data is in table format or not in the document, we're actually just sort of creating a table-like relationship to tell the model what to extract and sort of how to sort and orient that data in terms of the hierarchy or the taxonomy that you create. And so just to sort of give you an example of that, if I create a field group called header, I can also create a couple of fields here called, we'll say location, and I'll use exact text. I'll come back and explain some of what's going on here in just a moment. And I'll add another field date and date. And so I can add those two values. And if I go back to my sample document, I'm going to zoom in on that table at the top, this one right up here. And I have a location, I have a date here. And so what I'm starting to do is essentially build out, the set of fields that I want to capture from within what I'm calling this header section. If I were going to build this out more fully, what I would do is build similar field groups for gas settlement and gas purchases and NGL settlement, field deduction, so on and so forth, and then use the fields to designate all of the different columns that I need to capture as part of each of those tables. When I show you the finished product in just a moment, this will become more clear. So if it sounds nebulous, just bear with me for one moment, and I'll show a more complete example that should help clarify things a bit. But I'm going to go back to the taxonomy for a moment and talk about some of the things that are happening here that are interesting or useful, particularly with respect to the field type. Most of these are terms that you all probably understand. You have number and monetary quality, date, Boolean operators where you're designating, is this true or false or yes and no. You have exact text, which will extract the text exactly as it appears on the page. But you also have inferred text, and inferred text is interesting. So I want to just sort of take some time to talk about that. Inferred text is essentially making an inference on the value to extract based on some things that may not be explicitly stated within the document. So a good example of this, let's say you need to extract someone's age from a document. Well, if you only have a date of birth field in the document, you can get the date, but you may not be able to get the actual age. Well, inferred text will take that date of birth and it will calculate based on the current date what the age should be based on that relationship. And so instead of getting the date as an output, you might get 46 or 50 or whatever that is, because the model is making an inference on what the right value is based on some of the signals that exist within the document, but may not be explicitly called out as distinctly as we would typically expect. The other way that that can be used um, is as a sort of pick list, or to get the model to surface answers from a smaller list. So if you've worked in, with LLMs or with ChatGPT, for example, like you've probably seen use cases where somebody says, hey, what is the right color to pick with this dress? And then the right answers are either, blue or red or orange. So pick one of those three. So inferred text can work in a similar way. You may know that, for instance, terms, so payment terms are one of the things that we commonly see applied or used with inferred text, because the options are probably going to be net 30, net 45, or net 60. And if you know that one of those things is the right answer, then you can prompt the model to choose from that list, and you have a higher likelihood of that value being accurate, because you've sort of put some guardrails in place that narrow the field down to a much smaller subset from which to choose. The last way that I see inferred text used is just to summarize or synthesize data. So if you think about, something like a contract use case, um, uh, in a contracts use case, you may just need to understand, like, summarize this clause for me. I don't need all of the text in a clause. I just need some general information on what this clause is about. And inferred text is a good way to synthesize information, again, that you need, but without extracting all of the text that is associated with the way that answer is sourced. I saw a couple questions come in. Drew, you asked if AI units are consumed by any of these functions. In both modern experience and in unstructured and complex documents, AI units are not consumed until you start processing documents. So in the old world, some of you may have been associated or be familiar with training and hosting costs that were associated with building and deploying models with UiPath. In the modern interface and within IXP, the unstructured and complex documents interface that we're looking at right now, you can build all the models that you want, and then you don't start to incur any AI unit costs until you process documents. There are some nuances on sort of what processing documents means in the context of these different products, but a good rule of thumb is about one AI unit per page when you're processing documents. And there are some details that are sort of outlined in our metering and charging logic in our documentation if you want to know anything more than that. Um, Umair, you asked if it can detect ticks and cross from the checkboxes in an image file. I have seen it do that. I'm hesitant to say across the board that it can do that, but I have seen it perform pretty well at understanding, is a box checked or is it not checked? So I would say yes, but certainly worth some testing with your samples to ensure that that's true for your use case as well. But I've been pretty pleased with the performance in that area. So I am going to toggle over to our end project, and we'll look at the difference in the experience. So if you recall the example that I showed you, the document, there was a section called gas settlement, there was a gas purchases section, there was an NGL settlement table, field deductions table, so on and so forth. So I have this structured in such a way that I have a number of different tables called out. But what I've also done is I've created subcategories or subfield groups as well. Because in some cases, what I noticed as I was building the model or building the prompts is that the LLM wasn't giving me great results based on sort of mashing everything together in a single field group. And so what I wanted to do is break out the distinction with a bit more fine-grained with a more fine-grained approach and sort of give the model some indication of where to find the information and upon which sections of the document to make those predictions. And so the way that I've sort of broken it up is I have our gas settlement. There's a meter section. I'll toggle back over to the document in just a second so that you can see that. And we have all of our different fields that we're capturing as part of that process. And then if I toggle over to pay station, the exact same set of fields, but they're located slightly below the meter line in the document, and so they're broken out separately. And then we have our gas purchases section, so on and so forth. One of the things that I want to point out is that you'll notice that the instructions are pretty simple. When I tend to see people working in ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the foundational models, I tend to see them including very complex prompts that offer a lot of specificity. And that's great if it is necessary. But oftentimes with unstructured and complex documents, with these capabilities, we actually advise that you go simple from the jump. We see really good performance in some cases without any instructions at all. That is highly dependent on the nature of the document, the complexity. But I have worked on a number of projects where I didn't have to include instructions because the model is indexing the field name as well. And if something like date or price or is obvious, then there's a high likelihood that it will be able to pick that up with very little information about what is being extracted. And then if what you get back doesn't match your expectations, or if it isn't quite as accurate as you want it to be, then go back and start to layer in some additional detail. to enhance and change and update as you see fit or as is necessary. So I'm going to go back to look at one of our documents, and we will sort of see what I think of as a finished product in the sense that we have one of our documents, we have our gas settlement table. And if you recall, I had the gas settlement table broken out into some subgroups or some subcategories. And so here's our meter section where we have the first two rows, and we have our pay station, we have our first two rows. Then we have meter pay station and we have those rows. And if you sort of look over here in the right hand of the screen, you see all of those different sections represented in just the way that you saw them in the taxonomy that I showed you just a moment ago, with all of the sort of full fidelity broken out. And by and large, the predictions are very good. There are probably some updates that I could make. I haven't looked at this project in detail in a while, or this sort of demo in a while. But the last time I did, the outputs were pretty darn good. The one thing I will call out in addition to this is, you know, what we want to see our customers doing as part of this process is going through and validating the extractions, and just by confirming all the extractions. What this does is as you go through and tick the boxes for these values, when you confirm that information, it contributes to the project score. And so any changes that you make to those values, any confirmations that you make within that project will ultimately start to deliver you some improvements to that project score in the same way that it would in the modern interface. It won't trigger until I get probably like 4 or 5 that have been labeled. So I wouldn't expect to see this start to represent anything until that happens. But once it does, you'll get a very good sense of how well are the prompts performing across the board from a data-driven perspective. I think you will probably know, like finger in the air, how well does the project perform just based on what you're seeing in these predictions. But like sometimes it's much easier. These taxonomies can be very large when you're looking at upwards of 196 fields. In some cases, it can be hard to be really data driven, and this makes the process that much easier. The last thing that I want to do here is just call out a very different type of project. And I want to just flash up the product dimensions, because I think it's also important to know that we talk about our platform as being multimodal, and images are certainly part of what we perform pretty well at. I see charts and graphs being addressed pretty well. Images, product specs, things like that are also something that I see handled very well. And this, while this is just a very generic example that represents a typical kind of product spec use case where I grabbed a picture of a couch off of the Pottery Barn website, added a few simple prompts, and was able to get width, depth, height, everything returned to me without. I don't think I even created. Oh, I did. So with very, very simple instructions here. So just wanted to make sure that it was clear that, image-based formats are certainly, in the category of things that we can address. So as you start to encounter places where it might be interesting to capture image values, this capability might be something that will benefit you. Um, I'm going to pause right there. Any additional questions on IXP?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to our deck, and I'm going to start to close out. And so if you think of any additional questions that you want to ask, please feel free to drop them in, and I'll also, I'll hang out until 1 o'clock to answer any questions that happen to come up as we're waiting. But I recognize that there are a number of different ways that you might approach a project like this. And one of the ways that we see our customers looking at these kinds of solutions is to build their own. And what we have found is that there are some key considerations that are associated with building your own that make using this kind of capability very advantageous. And it can be as simple as these three things that you see on the screen. Model building and testing evaluation, then actually deploying in production are much, much harder than what you might expect. There's a lot of overhead that is associated with maintaining the environment, maintaining the data sets, and ultimately sort of collecting the information in a single usable place that will allow you to build and iterate on prompts. Evaluating performance can be very hard. If you are building it your own, then chances are good that your evaluation system will have to be built from scratch as well. And we have some very robust mechanisms out of the box. And then ultimately deploying it into production, it can be difficult. There are ways, obviously, through some technologies within the UiPath platform to start to consume models. But using the capabilities that are embedded in the platform already make it that much easier to reduce the time to value, reduce complexity, and continue to iterate over time. Um, the ultimate goal of this capability is to bring value to everyone in the ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, we work closely often with the COE, and it's really important for us to partner with them to make their lives easier, to arm them with information that makes their ability to do their job and perform that much easier. But what I would also argue is that capabilities like this make it easier than ever to partner with the business in a meaningful way to deliver projects, and that I think ultimately benefits everybody. Because we're talking about building in natural language, it gives the business a lot of opportunity to play a role in sort of the process that feeds into how that model is developed. It allows them to understand some of the nuances of the project prior to it being deployed into production. And so it ultimately ends up being a win-win by bringing the business and the COE together under a single hood where they can start to partner and work together to deploy the most effective set of capabilities for their business. So team, that's all that I've got for today. I'm gonna take a look at some of the new questions that came in. Are comms mining and document understanding bundles in the license now? So Drew, you asked if those two capabilities are bundled together. Um, I don't know if they officially are, but unofficially, yes. And what I mean by that is if you have communications mining, you have AI units. And if you have document understanding, you have AI units. You can use AI units however you choose to. And so if you see an opportunity to turn on document understanding and start to use that capability alongside communications mining, then for all intents and purposes, we're going to let you use those AI units in whatever way you see fit. So hopefully that makes sense. Ask a follow-up question if that's unclear. But the key message here is, AI units are universal in the sense that you can use them wherever, and we're not going to be a barrier to that. Most common mistakes or issues. So Tracy, you asked, what are the most common mistakes or issues that you see negatively impact results in IXP? I think the biggest thing to remember is that document understanding, the structured and semi-structured capabilities, is still the de facto choice, or should be the first place that you go to try to satisfy project requirements. And the reason that I say that is that with the capabilities in modern for structured and semi-structured, you can get very high fidelity deterministic results, meaning that you can continue to you can train a model to a certain level of accuracy. You can continue to optimize that model over time through fine tuning, which stands to reason it's going to help you grow the value of the solution over time. With IXP, it is a absolutely fantastic product. It is great at working on unstructured or complex documents. But what we often see is, customers trying to do things like, use it for invoices or use it for, something where we already have an out-of-the-box model. And in some cases, that can be effective or necessary. If the document is really hairy, then it makes total sense. But oftentimes it's unnecessary, and can be detrimental because within IXP, at least today, you lack the ability to continue to fine tune over time. The only way that you can improve the performance of the model is by tuning the prompts and tweaking the language that you're passing through to the LLM. And so you have less control and less ability to continually improve as the project moves into production through the data that we're capturing within human in the loop. We just don't have that today. It may be something that we do in the future, but I think it's an important distinction so that as we're sort of getting started on these projects, like folks are sort of understanding what are the right use cases to select. There are a lot of tools in the tool chest. How do I make sure that I use a saw to cut wood and a hammer to hammer nails and things like that. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake is IXP is really attractive because it is so easy to use. It will get you up and running very fast. But over the long term, it's harder to ensure that the results are consistent. And so if you can use the modern interface, I recommend you do it. And if you can't, that's when I would see IXP being the right choice. So I hope that helps. Umair, I don't think that it detects colors. I don't know that for sure. We are ultimately like digitizing text and passing it through to an LLM, and I don't know what signals in the document might the model might be able to infer has any colors. If there is anything on the ticket that can be used to sort of make that inference, other values that are on that document, then maybe. But I think the simple answer is that no, it won't detect color, or at least my suspicion is that it doesn't. I don't know that for sure. Um, So I'm gonna drop my email address as a last step. I'm gonna drop my email address in chat. If you heard anything today that you didn't want to ask on during the call, if you want my help finding some of the information that I talked about because you can't find it in the documentation, if there's something that you need, a follow-up question, please feel free to reach out. I would love to help you be successful in your journey with some of these technologies. So, if there are things that you need help with, please feel free to grab my email, send me a message, and I'll do what I can to help connect any dots that haven't been connected. But short of that, thank you for the time today. I appreciate it. Diana, thank you for hosting me. You've all been a great audience. Sincerely, thank you for spending time with us. I know that there are a lot of things that you could do, so I appreciate you choosing to do it with us. Have a great week, have a great day, and I hope to talk soon.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.